So please help me to welcome to the stage Ashish Jain, who is the CTO of Arkose Labs. He's going to be talking to us about integrating identity and fraud for a better passwordless experience. Welcome, Ashish.
Thank you, Megan. Hello, everyone. You can come to the front if you want. I won't throw stuff at you. It generally works the other way around, so I think you're safe. My name is Ashish Jain. I'm the CTO for a company called Arkose Labs, and we do bot management, fraud detection, and account security. And prior to joining Arkose, I used to run identity, risk, and fraud for eBay, and the charter of my team included all registration, authentication, KYC, all cancellations, disputes, and fraud. So I got a good chance to look at how does a global retailer rolls out authentication method at that scale. And then as part of my job at Arkose, I get to find out how does the fraudsters operate against these big providers. And I'm hoping to share some of that learning with you today. At a high level, I want to cover 3 points. Why should you implement passwordless? You're here at the conference. I'm assuming you have a good idea of why you want to do it. I want to take it one level down and share more insights into how do fraudsters operate. The second point would be that what passwordless methods that you should use. If you've been here for the last few days, you hear a lot about what we have done with FIDO, what we have done with passkeys. My thought process of rolling it out at a large-scale provider, it's slightly different. In my mind, passkeys is a great advancement in the right direction. But when you are thinking about passwordless for your whole organization, your strategy has to be much bigger than that, and I'll share some thoughts around that. The third part is how should you implement passwordless? It is very easy to agree the current state that we are in. It's also easy to agree the end state that where you want to be. The challenge comes in that how do I get from where I am to where I want to get to? What are the different milestones? How do I measure success across those different milestones? And what are the challenges I should be prepared for? So I want to walk you through some of that experience as we rolled out in my past multiple authentication methods. So why should you implement passwordless? We debated that, we discussed that in the keynote on the first day, that the amount of fraud that we are seeing in the last 4 or 5 years has gone significantly up. COVID in many cases almost acted as a turning point because there were so many new people who showed up on the internet. So this is why you see an increase in the online services and many kind of first-time digital natives that we had not seen before. We generally talk about the big breaches, the Capital One, the Verizon, and the Target, but we don't realize that on an average, 1 in 5 login attempts on your site is actually an account takeover attempt. Within the last year, we saw about 85% new increase in the fake account registration. I think Vittorio mentioned the numbers yesterday in the SIAM presentation that 30% of the accounts are now fake accounts. And there are multiple reasons why fraudsters do it. If you're a server-side company, cryptocurrency compute is a big resource hog, so crypto miners create new accounts. If you're a gaming company, there is in-app economy, the fraudsters create new accounts and spam the other members. If you're an e-commerce retailer, there is something called coupon fraud, where I give you $5 off for the first purchase, and there's a bunch of accounts which can essentially operate just for that. So that is a very, very real concern, which in many cases, identity helps, but not completely. The third part to understand is just the malicious traffic that you see in your site. On an average, if you take the number across the industry, 35% to 40% traffic on your site is actually spam traffic. And think about that, all of that traffic is taking your server resources, it's taking your compute, and it is impacting your site speed and has nothing to do with doing business with your site. So this is overall, across the industry, the numbers that we see. If I kind of click into a little bit more, how does the companies operate and handle that? In most companies that I get to talk to, there are almost like 2 silos. There is an identity side, and if you look around in this room and the conference sessions, the discussions that we generally have, how can I enable a great experience for a good user? What can I do to make it more frictionless? What can I do that my matrix that I generally measure, sign-in completion rate or new account registrations, can be lowered? So the focus has always been, what can I do for good users? On the other side, if you talk to your risk or a fraud counterparts, their focus is certainly different. And the metrics that they measure is the bottom line of how can I improve that? What are my account takeover numbers? What are my chargebacks? What is the number of cancellations or disputes increasing quarter over quarter? And the interesting part is that when a good user comes to your site, the places that generally interact would be registration and login as the first few ones. The most attacked pages across the website by the fraudsters are registration, login, and account recovery. So it's interesting that both the risk team and the identity team operate on the exact same endpoints with a very different metrics and a very different success criteria. And that's the gap I continue to see in the industry, where two sites in the same company are not having an integrated experience but more isolated one. To provide a little bit more details into how the fraud teams are thinking about it, at a very high level, you can think about why the attacks are growing, because there's a very organized underlying ecosystem. There are people, generally when you carry an attack, there are three parts. How do you gather the data? How do you run an attack? And how do you move the money? Gathering the data is when you're going to find the different combo list of username and a password. Making the attack is when you actually run the script to use the information. And then you move the money when you have money mules, where you use cryptocurrency, you have gift cards, you have virtual goods, or you open a car wash system to move the money out of the system. The higher thing that we have seen in the last few years is a lower barrier to entry. And I'll touch upon that, a few tools that are available to all of us, even the high school students, to be able to attack any website. I'm not going to cover all the topics here because I'm pretty sure this audience is pretty familiar. I'm going to cover the point. What has changed in the last few years is that historically, I'm sure you have seen the examples that somebody will call you on the phone. If they already have your password, they're going to say, I'm calling from your bank. I have some problem. I'm going to send you a code. Can you give me the code and I'll enter it? That process used to be manual. Somebody has to go operate it. Somebody has to spend 10, 15 minutes of their time to social engineer you to get the passcode. What we have seen change is that all of that has now been completely automated. There's a tool which came out last year called SMS Ranger, which essentially, once you have the password, run a script, they will send you a message, and they claimed 86% efficacy rate, which is the number of people they called and the number of people who shared their code with them is that high. So all of a sudden, you just lower the barrier to entry, and the economies for a fraudster to be able to attack became much higher. This is a tool. I'm just going to share some of the tools with you. It's called Sentry MBA. You can download it for free. And you give it a site name. You give it the username and a password. It figures out the right URL for login endpoints. It figures out the right formatting that it needs for username and password schemes. And then what you do is you go and find, they're called combo list. If you have connections, you can go into the Telegram communities. If you don't, just do a Google search. You find something on Pastebin. You get a combination of 1 million username and a password list. You cut paste them into this tool, keep it running depending upon how the list is there, and within an hour, you will actually have successful username and password combinations. So this is as easy it has become for fraudsters to take some time and being able to attack your websites. And if you think this is a little bit more complex, you go to the university called YouTube, and there are a bunch of tutorials for first-timers to get started. And not only will they tell you how to download the tool, how they have Telegram communities to help you embrace the policies of different providers. They will tell you where to find compute resources for cheaper if you want to do that. Many websites have velocity checks. This tutorials will explain you how do you kind of get proxy IPs, which has higher reputation. So all of that information is available. And honestly, like as a vendor, I have a list of all of our email addresses. In 30 minutes, I can give it a try to see how many of you have an account on Netflix. This is how easy it has become for anybody to be able to attack your websites. And again, this is some of the information that you get. There are very established server providers which will help you get compute resources for low. Similarly, IP, like I mentioned it, there are companies which will sell you residential IPs with a higher reputation so that you can bypass the IP velocity and the IP reputation checks that many companies have in place. Many times you think about that, but don't we have volumetric attacks and we can solve them with CAPTCHA? The answer is yes and a no. The gig economy is not just about Uber and DoorDash. The gig economy is that when you have services like that which publish their rates on their website, so in the low-wage countries, they essentially, the flow of it works is you will have a script which will attack it, you will see a challenge, the request get directed to somebody in the low-wage country, a human person will solve it, and then you get redirected back to the main website. And the rates are about 1,000 CAPTCHA solves for $1, and you can buy them on a monthly basis, or you can buy them on a bulk basis. And this is how you kind of get to bypass some of the bot attacks that you see. If this wasn't any easier, a new tool came out. It's called Open Bullet, and in addition to the checkpoint, it also published the specific templates. So for instance, at eBay, we had a policy, if you enter your password 2 times, I'm going to block you for 15 minutes. Well, they figured out to be able to create a template and a blueprint so that they know exactly how to configure a campaign to attack a specific website. And they have established Telegram communities where they share the policies of all the major service providers so that the blueprints can be better and better every time. Everything I have shared so far, by the way, is completely free, open source. You can download it and give that a try, which is why you will see a lot of high schoolers or college dropouts giving it, because there is more money to be made here than what they can do by getting a career. The other tool which came into market is called Genesis Marketplace, and historically, if you think about it, if you log into Google from a brand new device, you generally get an alert by saying, I have not seen this device before, you have to do an 2FA. If you try to log into, let's just say, Netflix, they will let you log in, but you're going to get an email afterwards by saying, I'm seeing a new device. So most companies have some concept of a trusted device where I have not seen this device before. What Genesis Marketplace does is, in addition to all the password replay I showed earlier, they deploy a malware on your device, and then they capture your user agent, they capture your cookies, they capture your browser version, and then they also have an inbuilt browser so that they can fake all of that information and present as the right device with the right cookie. So you're going to buy the complete package. As you can imagine, the efficacy is so much more higher, and there is a paid version that you can buy in order to get there. We discussed Octopus a few times in the last few days. I won't touch upon it, but the fact that somebody can take the educated supply chain worker to a phishing site and attack it, and we saw about 10,000 compromised user credentials just at that part. Within the last 2 weeks, we also saw something called Evil Proxy. If everything Octopus did was a little bit manual, Evil Proxy gave you a chance to attack the website, send the SMS in a completely automated fashion. If anybody's looking for a demo, meet me after this. This is something that you have to kind of be in that underground economy to have access to. So we spent some time, joined a few Telegram communities to get access. It's about $400 subscription per month, a little bit pricey, but at the same time, it is fully automated, absolutely nothing required. They set up a reverse proxy for the major sites, Google, Microsoft, Dropbox, and they take care of complete SMS automation for you. And you build a proxy server, you give them a domain name, and everything else is completely automated. Hopefully, this is a little bit alarming, and if you thought you knew why you were implementing Passwordless, this gives you a little bit more incentive. We get the economies, and if you buy, you can buy for free from PageSprint, but if you search for it about $550, you can buy your database, and then you get some proxy servers, you get some dedicated hosting. The reward on the other side is that you can get $1 to $5 for per new account. And it depends the account that you're trying to create. The account for an e-commerce which is running a coupon campaign is much rewarding compared to if I'm sending in spam. Same thing goes for the compromised account. If I get a compromised account where the website supports virtual goods, where it's easy for me to make money out, or if the account has a stolen financial or a credit card attached to it, it is a higher reward. But overall, the essence was that if I run my operation for 1 day, that is enough for me to fund my operation for the remaining month. So this is why it is becoming a more and more lucrative business as we go along. The next question comes in, okay, this is definitely a pain point. What should I do about it? We talk about passwordless, and the question comes in, what passwordless method should I deploy? Now, the place where it gets tricky is that when you pick a passwordless method, we talk about usability, the completion rate, the time it takes for a user to sign in, the registration, and we talk about security. The other part to take into account is just the maintainability. If you think rolling out an authentication method is hard, rolling it back is even harder. Try giving a toy to a kid and say, I'm going to take it back. So whenever you pick an authentication method, for instance, we picked KBA, which is, what street did you live in 1967? And even though people complained about it when you rolled it out, but when you said, I'm going to take it out, suddenly you see a lot of people complaining that is not right because people have changed their behaviors, they have done the knowledge, and they have educated themselves. So it's very hard to take it. The second thing to take into account is support cost. Like when we supported login with Google, as an example, there is a bunch of people who complain that, wait a minute, I'm logging into eBay, why do I have to click on login with Google? Similarly, when you first mandate SMS to a certain population, there's a lot of complaints when people are taking 30 seconds to get the SMS and they're all calling the customer support. So you have to take into account how do you maintain it, how do you support it when you pick any authentication method. I'm going very fast because I know I'm running out of time. The other thing to keep in mind that when you roll out an authentication method, at a minimum, you have to think about 3 flows: the registration or the onboarding flow, the login flow, and the account recovery flow, because it has touch points into all 3 of them. During my time at eBay, we either touched or revamped or completely built from scratch all of those authentication methods. And this is where my opinion slightly differs from what you hear in the conference for the last 2 days, is that, in my opinion, there is not really a single silver bullet that you can use to deploy across your customer base. Irrespective of, there would be a set of people, for instance, like biometric, they will be completely against because they don't know whether or not biometric is used to unlock the private key on your device or you're storing the biometric on the server side, and you can't educate them. So they will be completely against adopting it. And then it goes back to the security posture of each of them. Email verification is the easiest to implement, but then you have a context switch that you get about 10 to 15% dropout rate. SMS, if you look around, a question was asked yesterday or the day before in the keynote that why don't we all share the information of what is the percentage of adoption. In my mind, it is very hard to answer that question for 2 reasons. No relying party has any incentive to share that number in public. In fact, the moment I explain that, oh wait, we only have 4% 2FA adoption, I'm actually inviting the fraudster to say, please come and attack me, I'm a better target than somebody else. The second part is it's so much context dependent. If you access a website on a daily basis, then your sign-in completion rate versus if you go to Airbnb or Expedia where I log in once a quarter, or if I go to a website where I do my taxes, I do that once a year, my completion rate is very, very different, and hence it is so context dependent that even if the website share the numbers, it will not make much sense to you because your business is different. Overall, if you look into the industry, I'm pretty sure that the 2FA adoption as of today is in a single digit, and of that, SMS is probably the most common ways to be able to deploy that. SMS is about 60-70% across the industry, different metrics. There are things like WebAuthn, which does a great job in terms of getting the 2FA authentication into a single flow, but the moment I talk about once a year access, 30% people change their devices within a year. So all of a sudden, if I access a site once a year, for instance, my tax website, I have to re-register my keys. And that's the use case. Passkey does a pretty good job. But for many other scenarios, like PST2 and SCA that Bill mentioned just before me, where WebAuthn does a great job and considered a factor, passkeys, because they are shareable and without a DPK, takes it out of the picture. Now, the question then comes in, okay, how do I go about it? How do I measure it? Now, before I get into there, I want to spend some time on what I call passive authentication. I do not know if that's an industry term. I use it, which is that active authentication is that when a user has to take certain action. Passive authentication is that I can get some information about this session, about this user, without any interaction from the user. And there are things like IP. Anytime you access a website, I get to know your IP. I get to know whether or not you're coming from a botnet. I get to know you're coming from a data center. There is no reason to get 100 registration requests from a data center. I get to know whether or not you're coming from a Tor exit node. Similarly, the moment you share my email, I can find out whether or not this is a burner domain. How long was this email created? Is there email tumbling or email enumeration involved, such as Ashish 1, Ashish 2, and Ashish 3? All of that are signals to me that there is a fake account registration going on. I can do the same thing with phone number, whether or not it's a prepaid phone or a postpaid phone. whether or not this is a voice over IP phone. There are a bunch of signals I can get simply by looking at those passive signals that I don't need to know any interaction. We talk about DBK in the last few days, but the classic device fingerprinting where I can get the device signature data, identify the spoofing attacks. Many fraudsters use randomized signatures to bypass the defenses against velocity. If I'm able to detect that for this iPhone, this screen size does not make sense, or this canvas fingerprint has no reason to be, or this color palette for Android doesn't exist, I can identify all of those randomization and protect the site against it. The other common thing that you have seen is the behavior biometrics, which is that how do you mouse movements, gestures, touch points. When I enter my phone number, I generally enter 3-digit pause, and then the 4 digits. The moment you see all of them being entered at one time is an indication that something is wrong. So there are a bunch of passive signals, and if you take them into account and you're able to put them together and triangulate it, on the x-axis, for instance, you see something like the attack signature, common attack signature. On the y-axis, I can detect all the device spoofing. On the z-axis, I can get the IP reputation. I can find the clusters of fraud rings, which I do not need to have any challenge to the end user. I'm going to skip this in the interest of time. Overall, when you talk about the identity journey, there are 3 things you should think about. How do I handle back traffic? What is my authentication strategy? And how do I do verification? Verification by itself is a long tail. Do I need to know your name, and that's good enough? Do I need to verify your email address, or do I have to do KYC because of compliance reasons? How do I get there? This is some of the prep work, I would say. If you have not implemented identity first before you even take on the journey of passwordless, my recommendation is that you should. And identity first is when you decouple your login screen where the identifier and the credential, instead of being in one screen, you put them into 2 screens. And there are multiple benefits to that. The first being that you can store the identifier. The second one is you can do discovery of what authentication method is available for this user on this device. The thing to note about that, when you first roll it out, your number's going to look a little bit bad because you're splitting a single screen to 2 screens. But if majority of your users are repeat users, then over a period of time, they're going to stop seeing the first screen. So there are the numbers you should be aware of, that in short term, it will look bad. Longer term, this is the right call to make. The other thing that you should think about, for instance, do a passive authentication, because it will help not replace, but augment your active authentication strategy. And there are a number of companies, Arkose being one of them, where you can do things like device fingerprinting, behavior biometrics, and IP intelligence to augment that information. One other point I want to highlight is the social sign-in. It also came up in the build session prior to this. If you think about it, that I'm sure you have experienced the login with Google. I'm going to take the example of an Apple. On Apple, if you have a native application, there is a SDK by Apple where you can just do Touch ID or Face ID and you can log into the app. If you support the concept of sign in with Apple, the experience would be that you click on something, you redirect to Apple, and then something pops up, you do Face ID and you can log in. If you see the passkey experience is the exact same thing. You either click on a button or in the login box, you click on something, something pops up, you do Face ID, you're logged in. From an end user standpoint, the experience of all of those 3 flows, the SDK by Apple, sign in with Apple, and passkey is exactly the same. I see something on the screen, I click on it, something pops up, I do a Face ID, I log in. The security posture underneath is completely different. The complexity of implementing and maintaining for a relying party is completely different. So I think this is where the challenge is that you may have to think about is that is login with Apple or with Google is critical to you, and how does you co-share the same space with passkeys and not confuse the user that you're clicking on 2 buttons with the exact same experience but very different behavior underneath it. The other part, the other question, we made a comment yesterday that it should be like seat belt, I should nudge you. There is a difference in between nudging and annoying. It makes complete sense to nudge your users to accept 2FA, but it comes a point when it suddenly becomes more annoying. And this is why we implemented a snooze logic. I'm going to show you 2 times. If you don't want to adopt it, I'm going to bypass it. In my mind, 2FA is not like a seatbelt. It's more like your dentist telling you to floss. Every time you go in, they said you should floss. Next time they say you should floss. You have a few more cavities. The nudging becomes harder and harder. At this time, I'm sharing more personal details I should. But regardless, my point is it is very hard to mandate that you should implement 2FA. If you're a 401k site, you're a government site, it makes sense. If I'm eBay, I'm selling toasters and a pair of jeans for $12.99, I can't mandate my users to have to implement 2FA, which is why the alternative strategies around augmenting are more critical. Very high level recap. I hope you realize the intensity and why you should, or the sensitivity of why you should implement passwordless, because it becomes so easy for you to attack. I hope you realize that at least in my math, there are multiple options that you have, passkeys being the leading one, but you need to cover that with different options for backup, for recovery, for customer support, for heterogeneity and diversity in your customer base. And the third thing is implement milestones and measurable goals as you go into that journey. And there will not be any silver bullet. So instead of waiting till anything becomes perfectionist, like passkeys, you have to get started now. I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish.